Hi everybody, FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos here, and for our Thanksgiving show, well, Thanksgiving for those of you who are in the United States anyway, or from the United States, we're going to take a look at some games from the ongoing World Cup in Khanty-Mansisk, and I thought I'd take a look at a couple of miniatures that were played today, actually, as I'm recording this, and also a very amusing game. So these were all from Rapid Games, and I think you'll find them entertaining. So something a little bit light, certainly some instructional value, but I think more for amusement's sake. Okay, well, we'll draw some lessons along the way, but let's have a look. So our first game is Shirov against Fedorchuk, and this is their third Rapid game, and Shirov had won the first two, so he only needed a draw at this point, and his one draw in his last two games would have sufficed to let him advance. And as we'll see, he more than fulfilled that task. Okay, so he's white. Fedorchuk is black, and Fedorchuk is a very strong GM. He's 26-19 FIDE rated, and he beat Shirov in their second slow game yesterday. Okay, so this is a pretty well-known variation. I don't know that it's that popular at the club level, but there are hundreds of games, if not more, at the professional level that have reached this position. So here black has just a glut of moves. So he can play d6, he can play knight f6, can play knight c6, can play d5, b6, queen c7, all kinds of stuff. But here Fedorchuk found a new move, bishop to f6. Alright, the idea is, well, okay, in some of these Kahn/Paulsen Sicilians, black will fianchetto the king bishop, even with the pawns on a6 and e6. And so the idea, I suppose, is to put this bishop, the dark square bishop, on the long diagonal without making the weakness to the pawn structure that g6 entails. So it's a logical idea. Of course, whether it works out well in terms of the specifics is another question, but it's at least a sensible idea. And, you know, someone's got to be the first, and why not Fedorchuk? Well, Shirov played c3. Knight c3 is also fine, but c3 is standard, and then the idea is to bring this knight to d2, sometimes to f3 after maybe f4, or even right away, but generally to c4 is another standard approach. Okay, black played knight to c6. Perhaps the immediate knight to e7 was worth considering. Okay, knight 1 to d2. And here, black really needs to do something about the threat of knight to c4. And I think Fedorchuk just kind of went to sleep on this and didn't really consider it too seriously. And I mean, indeed, you don't see a move like knight from 1 to d2 and think, oh my gosh, I better do something quick or I'm going to get killed here. It looks just like a pretty unassuming developing move. And Fedorchuk probably thought he had all the time in the world. So probably he had to play d5, and white is certainly better here. Quite a bit better, but not winning yet, I don't think. b5, on the other hand, is a little bit more iffy. I think after white castles, he'll then play a4 at some moment in the near future and have quite a bit of pressure against black's queen side. So I think probably the best chance for black, who's already in some trouble, is d5. But he played knight g to e7, and at first glance, as I said, it doesn't really look that horrible, but it is. After knight to c4, here we are on move 10, black had already resigned. He's just lost. So, for instance, okay, if he castles, this is a very simple line, but pretty amusing. Queen e8, knight to d6, and goodbye queen. So that's not going to win any awards for great play. What else could he try? Well, he could play queen to c7, and on bishop to b6, play maybe queen to b8. If he goes to f4, then if nothing else, white can just play g3, and then have knight to d6 check as a follow-up. Or, actually, maybe even better, well, I'm not sure, but at least that, with a humongous edge. So this is pretty dreadful for black as well. If he goes back to b8, well, then something new and amusing occurs, bishop to c5. One threat is to play knight to d6 check, which is just a positional threat. And the other idea is to play knight to b6, and after rook a7, you take on c8, and then bishop takes on a7. So a complete disaster here. So in this already hopeless position, black played d5. Makes sense, trying to grab some space. But the problem is his queen is trapped still. Bishop to b6. Now, if queen to d7, knight c5, and the queen is a goner, she has absolutely nowhere to go. So Fedorchuk tried to entertain himself with d takes c4, bishop d8, cd, but he's only getting 2 pieces for the queen, and in fact white gets a pawn as well. So here, 14 moves into the game, Fedorchuk decided to call it a day. Not so impressive. Well, for our next game, let's see what Shirov's boyhood friend Alexander Shabalov came up with. So this too proved disastrous for the opponent. Now this was also played in the same sub-round, and like Fedorchuk, Shabalov had actually lost his first 2 games. This is against David Navarra, very strong player. But unlike Fedorchuk, Shabalov rose to the occasion and even won this game. All right, so Navarra played d4, knight f6, knight f3, b5, the Polish defense here, bishop to g5, bishop to b7, e3, a6, c4. Okay, this is already a fairly rare position, and here Shabalov plays a move that has only been played once before, and it was in a pretty low-level game. All right, I think in that game White played bishop to f4, maybe it was bishop to h4, but Navarra played c takes b5, and already here on move 6 we're in virgin territory. Now, one of the big dangers of getting into an original position so quickly is that you don't really have any landmarks to go by. You don't have experience. You often don't have any familiar landmarks, and so that means that well, it reduces a lot of a player's advantage and general ability, I would say even. To give an analogy, okay, there's the very famous psychological study by Adrian de Groot many years ago. I think the book that was published compiling his results was called something like Thought and Choice in Chess. Anyway, one of the most famous experiments that de Groot did was to set up 2 kinds of positions. So first he set up a position that was kind of a standard, typical chess position. Okay, so all the pieces were on normal squares, and he let his test subjects look at the position for a number of seconds, maybe 15 seconds, and then see how well they could do in reconstructing it. And grandmasters would do a flawless job, get everything right. Masters would do a very good job, and so on down. I mean, the lower the player's rating or strength, the worse they did. So, you know, the more experience, the better. And generally, even tournament players did pretty well, while novices, you know, got very little. I mean, it was basically they were just trying to memorize one element at a time. But then what de Groot did was he set up a random position, so something where there's no rhyme or reason, something that you would expect to see in some kind of bizarre mate in 2 position, or maybe even more random than that. And then when he tested everybody, it turned out that there was basically no difference, maybe a very tiny difference, between even a grandmaster and a complete novice. So it was a very interesting result, and it shows a number of things. I mean, one is that chess players don't necessarily have great memories, they have great chess memories. And secondly, it supported or maybe introduced this idea of chunking, which is a kind of part of a theory of memory, which says that what we memorize isn't, let's say, individualized bits, let's say things that are objectively bits, but elements that are, let's say, combined in various ways. So, for instance, well, the most simple and obvious example that we're all familiar with is language. So a little kid learning how to read is reading one letter at a time. But for us, a word is a chunk, and sometimes even a whole phrase is a chunk. So Mary had a little lamb is a single chunk. Okay, we don't have to memorize that one letter at a time, as someone would who didn't know any English or didn't recognize English characters, and someone who didn't know that nursery rhyme might have to memorize it one word at a time. We don't. So for us, that whole thing is a chunk. Okay, well, coming back to the game here at hand in this position, one of the interesting things about going into unknown positions is that you're basically stripping a player of the knowledge that he has that's, let's say, chunk-based. So what a player like Navarra, as great as he is, knows about a position like this is very small. It's going to be built off of analogies, and that's going to have its gaps. And as we'll see, I mean, he falls apart very quickly. Okay, so here Shabalov takes, A takes b5, bishop b5, and all of a sudden after c6, white is already in some danger here. So he's already got to kind of figure out what he's doing, and already, even before he took on b5, he had to figure this out. So the basic problem here for white that he has to solve is that when this bishop moves away someplace, there's queen to a5 check, and then queen takes g5. And this is a well-known trick. I'll just show you a couple of well-known examples where it can arise. So there's this famous little bit of foolishness, which has occurred at least 11 times. And there's 11 games with this in the database. All of them saw queen to a5 check. In one case, white even resigned. That was a game Djordjevic against Kovacevic, played in 1984. And probably the shortest played game with a decisive result in tournament chess history. Actually, it's funny. 2 of the games, white managed to still draw here. So that's, I think, maybe even worse from black's point of view than losing this way. But anyway, that's one example of that trap. Another example of this kind of trick comes from a line of the Schliemann. And then here, white normally plays knight to c3 and plays this piece sack, but if he retreats the bishop someplace, let's say to a4, then queen to a5 check, and black grabs the pawn on e5, and white's compensation is inadequate. There is some compensation. It's not just a cut and dried free pawn, but it shouldn't be enough. Anyway, that's what white has to worry about here in this Navarro-Shabalov game. In fact, you might want to try to figure out what it is that white's move ought to do here. It's not so easy. I think there's only one good move here. Well, in the game, Navarro chose queen f3, and this is in fact losing or close to losing. The only good move here was queen to b3. So both moves hit f7, so they have that in common, and both in some way are kind of lining the queen up with this bishop on b7, but in different ways. Now here, if black plays e6, then after bishop to c4, white's simply a pawn up, and the bishop on b7 looks kind of stupid here. So let me see. So e6, yeah, is a mistake. So queen a5 check is probably forced. Knight c3 is forced. cb. And now white can take on f7 either way. In both cases, it becomes very messy. He's going to be down a piece, but for good play. All right. Well, instead of going into the details of that, which you can explore on your own as easily as I can, I'll just show you how the game went. So queen f3, f6, knight h3, and now we see the big difference between queen to f3 and queen to b3, and it's that after queen to b6, white is just completely lost. So the bishop on b7 is protected, so there's a threat to take this way. Of course, the bishop is under attack by the queen as well, and this is what was missing in the queen to b3 case, b2 was under attack, or is going to be under attack, and with it, not just the pawn, but the rook. So white is already completely lost. The game ended a few moves later. A little bit of a threat of queen h5, so he stops it. And here black only has one good move, but it's more than good enough. Knight to b4. So he saves his queen, and he's simply up a rook for absolutely nothing, with a better position to boot. Of course, it's easy to have a better position when you're a rook up in a normal position. So easy win for Shabalov. Didn't quite manage to save the match, but this certainly gave him a chance. All right. Well, finally, I'll take a look at the most amusing game of the day, I think. And this is from the match between Alexiev and Fressinet, the French player. So in this position, okay, well, the match situation at this point was that Alexiev had won the first game of their rapid tiebreak. So the rapid tiebreaks were of 4 games. So even if Fressinet didn't win this game, he still had 2 more chances to equalize or even win the match. All right. So anyway, here black is doing completely fine. Material is even. This came from a classical Rui, but it could have come from a Joko piano. Basically black has no problems. White has a bishop versus a knight. Sometimes that can be an advantage. On the other hand, black has a little bit more space in the center. So really, if black just sat tight, maybe played something like d takes e4, d takes e4, and rook e to d7, just to give one example, he would have no worries whatsoever here. Easy draw, and maybe he could try to do a little something, but really this is just a very difficult position for either side to achieve much. All right, well, Black decided it was important to do something though, so he plays h5, and this actually isn't really a bad move, but it's the beginning of a plan that doesn't quite work out the way Black had intended. All right, Alexiev just waits with bishop to a2. Fresnel continues his plan. Queen c1. And now, okay, the idea is to play queen to g5, which not only attacks this pawn, but also has the threat of queen takes g6 if d takes e4 ever happens because of this pin. So Black decides just for, out of tactical hygiene, to play the move king f8. All right. White plays queen to g5, encouraging Black to complete his mini plan. And so Black has done it. And now we can ask, well, to what end? So before the position was even, now the position is not even. In fact, White is clearly better here. Well, why? Well, let's think about this exchange. In the abstract, it was very good for Black. He got rid of a rook pawn, which is the least useful pawn on the board, again speaking in the abstract. And he exchanged it for a near center pawn, so the f pawn. So that part makes great sense for Black. On the other hand, let's think about the function that these pawns played in the game. So on h6, Black's pawn kept White's pieces off of g5. It kept the queen off, it kept the knight off, and made it harder for White to make any approach on the king side. White's f-pawn didn't really serve any valuable function. In fact, if anything, we could sort of say it served a function for Black, which was keeping the f-file closed. So at this point, White is just going to switch gears and pile up on the f-file. His queen is nicely placed, and Black has gained absolutely nothing. I mean, he's made 4 useless moves: h5, h4, hg, and king f8. While White, for his part, has brought his queen from I think it was c2. Make sure. Yeah, from c2, where it didn't do anything at all, to g5, where it's already in the neighborhood. Okay, so let's see how the game continues. Black plays d takes e4, and this is, I think, double-edged, but well motivated. The reason it's double-edged, of course, is that now this bishop's diagonal from a2 reaches all the way to f7 with no impediment. The reason why it's a well-motivated idea, though, is that Black needs to get some counterplay somewhere before White just builds up on the king side and kills him. So he's trying, now with rook to d3, to distract White a bit. Well, this just forces White to play another move that he wants to play, rook f1. Okay, queen is c8, and now White makes a good move. He chases the rook away, rook d6, and now knight e4. And all of a sudden, you can see that White is just winning here. I mean, this is catastrophic. He's threatening to take on g6. He's threatening to play knight f5. The f-file is opening up here. I mean, it's horrible. Here's a funny line just for amusement's sake. If rook to e8, of course White could play knight g6, but just slightly amusing. We have a little checkmate here. Okay, of course that's terrible, but there really isn't anything that's great for Black here. He plays knight h4, probably about as good a move as there is in the position. Queen h4. And now, see if you can see White's threat. We only get about 5 seconds for this one. Okay, well, we'd like to play queen h8. It's not mate, though, because of knight to g8. So the threat, of course, is to play rook f6 and then queen h8 mate. So Black plays king to g8, undoing one of his earlier moves. And now White plays g4, showing that the king is not really so perfect on g8 either. So the threat's just to play g5 and g6, and this is going to be decisive. All right, Black tried to play b5. Well, he didn't try to play it. He did play it. So his try was successful, but he tried to distract White with this move b5, and White rightly ignores it. Simply bishop to a2. And this is a good rule of thumb, that when your opponent is trying to distract you, if you've got a plan that's very, very effective, very dangerous, and working beautifully, you don't want to be distracted. So b5, White would be foolish to take twice on b5 take the bishop off the diagonal, open up lines on the queen side, and generally speaking, let black start to at least dream of a little counterplay. So bishop to a2 is a very good move, simply ignoring this meaningless thrust on the queen side. Okay, in fact, to show how bad black's position is here, he tried rook d to e6. So, okay, if he couldn't buy the bishop off with a pawn, now he's going to try to buy him off with the exchange. Nothing doing. g5, knight h7, and now g6. Absolutely killing black. If he plays f takes g6, then queen e7 exploits this pin, and is, of course, just obviously killing. So black plays knight f8, and now gf7, rook f7, rook f7, king f7, rook f2 check, and black is just is toast here. Okay, if he plays king to e8 now, then if nothing else, though why you don't need anything else, rook f8 check is decisive, winning the queen. So black played king to g8, and here white played queen to e7, and black simply resigned. Actually here, he could have played rook takes f8 again, since again king f8, queen h8, and if the queen takes, then bishop e6 wins, wins everything. Okay, so that's not exactly acceptable either. But even the move in the game was completely fine. It forced resignation. The threat is to play rook takes f8, and on queen f8, bishop e6 with mega splat here. So an absolutely crushing attack by Alexiev, but the ridiculous thing is that he had nothing until Freycinet came up with this brilliant plan of h5, h4, hg. So in addition to its being rather amusing, I think it's a salutary reminder that you don't always need to do something. Okay, black did something, all right. He killed himself. He committed suicide on the chessboard. So, have enough respect for your opponent. I mean, push. If it's someone you feel like you should beat, or if it's a must-win situation, then keep trying. But be aware that you can't just win by trying to do something. I mean, it's got to be grounded in the position. And all this idea of black's did was to self-destruct. All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed these games. I don't normally take a look when I'm doing these presentations at current GM games, but I thought this was that these were kind of interesting and topical games that you might enjoy. So thanks a lot. Let me remind everybody to check out my new website, thechessmind.net. So it's not chessmind, but thechessmind.net. And also, those of you who are interested in taking lessons, I give them. So drop me a note on here in the mail on here, and we can try to set something up. So thanks a lot, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.